Hello and welcome back to a new and improved, or at least new and not yet disproved version of Not Even Mad. Today we speak of if Donald Trump has or even can overreach, blaming a plane crash on DEI, authorizing Elon Musk to knock salt tablets out of the mouths of dehydrated babies in Zambia. But to be entirely nonpartisan, we'll also look at the disastrous Democratic polling. As we do so, we promise to uphold our reputation for refutation, while at the same time vowing to be not even mad. I say we, who are we? I am joined by Katie Herzog, co-host of Blocked and Reported, and author of the forthcoming book. Katie, what's the title? I like to drink, but then I stopped.
Something like that. No, it is Drinking Your Way Sober, the science-based method to get free from alcohol. I think that's what it is. I haven't finished writing it yet. I think that's what it is.
You're not entirely sober, so that can't be held against you.
Right.
And when is that out?
It's out the end of September, and it is technically a bestseller already. I have not turned in the final draft, but it is technically a bestseller.
Well, don't turn in the final draft. It can only go down from here. We're also joined by Jonah Goldberg, who is editor-in-chief and co-founder of The Dispatch. Got any books about sobriety in your satchel, Jonah?
Sobriety isn't even a implied subtext of any of my books, so no.
No. Nor does it inform many of your famous opinions over the years.
That's right.
So let's talk about DEI, said Donald Trump upon hearing the news of 67 people dying in the biggest air disaster in 20 years. He took to the airwaves, did a smidgen of consoling, and then talked about everyone that the FAA would be allowing in now. We'll play this clip, but I'll play it here. This includes people affected by hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism. So there, Donald Trump blaming it on the one-legged dwarves. Now, part of what I think was really going on was that he, as commander-in-chief, had some knowledge of who the pilots of the Black Hawk were. And one of them is a captain or former captain named Rebecca Loback, who graduated in the top 20% of ROTC candidates and was an Army aviation officer since 2019. But she, and importantly, she did serve in a honorary capacity in the Biden White House. So I think maybe he knew he could stir the pot with DEI. But am I maybe overthinking it? Yeah, probably has to do with Trump. There were, however, some real changes or real initiatives at the FAA that were of certainly a DEI ilk. And Katie, I had been hearing about them on your show for a couple of years or within a couple of years. So what can you tell us about, well, if you think that Donald Trump is overstepping his bounds, but also what the FAA really has been doing in terms of tweaking the system to allow more people to work for it?
So this goes back to some reporting that my former researcher, his name is Jack Despain. He goes by the name Tracing Woodgrains, and he was actually a DEI hire when he applied for a job at my show. The email that he sent said that he was both a vet. He was in the Air Force. He was also an ex-Mormon and a gay furry, which is the only reason that he got the job, for the record.
So a vet and in need of a vet.
If he had been a straight furry, you would have been
out.
Okay.
No, had to be a gay furry. And so Trace did some digging into his story about the FAA last year and how they were hiring air traffic controllers. And what he found was a lawsuit going back about 10 years that was filed by graduates of the I don't know the name of it, but the programs that people go to train to be air traffic controllers. And what they found,
and there were really only one or two. I mean, these were feeder schools for 95% of all air traffic controllers, right?
Yeah, and what they found, what this lawsuit alleged, and I think this was found to be true, was documents showing that there was an exam that was basically fed to graduates of this program that would weed out candidates. And this exam was not based on how well you performed in the program. It wasn't even an aptitude test. It asked these bizarre biographical questions, like, what is your favorite color? I believe that was one of the questions. What sports did you play in school? What class did you perform the least well in high school? And these exams were, according to this lawsuit, I believe I'm getting this right, these were fed to some minority candidates in advance of the test. So basically the correct answers to this exam were completely arbitrary. And some people were given the answers to the exam.
I thought that there was even additional details, like if your least favorite class was science, you got some extra points.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was all happening. This was all happening over a decade ago. They sued these graduates of this program, sued the Department of Transportation, I believe, and named Pete Buttigieg. And their suit, I believe the suit is still ongoing. But I think that there are valid concerns that the department, the agency, did try to basically circumvent some established rules in order to hire their preferred candidates, and some of that was demarcated by race. Now, does that have anything to do with the lesbian soldier who was in this helicopter? We have no idea. We have absolutely no idea. We have no idea what this stuff is all going to be investigated. We have no idea what air traffic controllers had to do with it. But Trump, what I have noticed in the past months is that there's been this. You remember back in say 2020 when there was this real tendency on the left to blame every perceived social ill on systemic racism. And sometimes systemic racism probably was at play. Maybe it was a police shooting or something like that. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was a crosswalk Karen who called the police on somebody who parked their car in a crosswalk. And these stories would go viral, and the assumption coming from the left was always that the root of this problem is white supremacy and racism. And you're seeing the same thing right now on the right, where DEI has become this boogeyman. And I have plenty of complaints about DEI. I'm the lib on the panel today. I still have criticisms of DEI, especially these sort of email jobs that don't really do much, and anti-racism trainings that have proven to be not just counterproductive, not just a waste of time, but actually counterproductive. All of that is true. But DEI is no more of a boogeyman. It's become a boogeyman the same way that systemic racism has. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with this story.
So, Jonah, do you agree with that? And even if you do, shouldn't we note that overreach and blaming everything on the boogeyman of either DEI or systemic racism did not serve the blamers well, ultimately?
Right. No, look, I think that's right. And I have no first order objection to any of that. I'm still struggling with the gay furry part, but other than that,
we fired him. Don't worry.
Oh, but I think it's worth backing up and saying it is entirely possible the DEI played some nefarious role here, right? But we don't know. The problem, like there is a reason. I'm a sort of a Chesterton's fence guy. Like, if you don't know why we do certain things, keep doing it until you figure out whether or not the reason for doing it is still valid or not. Don't just stop doing it because you don't like it, right? There's a reason why presidents of any party, as a matter of just good procedure, don't get ahead of the facts and start opining about disasters, nuclear disasters, plane crashes. It doesn't matter, right? So you have Trump go out there, and I'm willing to say that it's possible he had some advanced information about this, but the Occam's razor suggests he just likes being a pundit and opining on anything where there's a lot of attention in real time. And which he started doing, he said, he started opining about the video, saying this makes no sense, blah, 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 as if he has a really great grasp of aeronautical procedure over National Airport. But the reason why presidents don't get ahead of the facts, among other things, is that you actually want a legitimate investigation. And this is how institutions get even more politicized, right? So he gets a lot of crap for saying it was DEI. So J.D. Vance, Sean Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, all these people then have to say, oh, he's right. Right?
Yes.
So now,
Yes.
let's say you're an investigator from the NTSB and you find out it has something to do with some O-ring or someone tripped over a plug or 100 other reasons, right? You're now under intense political pressure to at least throw Trump's theory of the thing a bone because you don't want to embarrass him and get shit on from above. You know, it's sort of like Trump taking the Sharpie and extending the hurricane to Alabama when it didn't go that way. And everyone felt, well, you know, we actually might have a point, like, because no one wants to get on the wrong side of the guy. It's just incredibly bad form, particularly when they're still pulling bodies out of the water, to turn this into a culture war issue. When even if it were a culture war issue, you'd be much more effective to wait for the report that says, hey, this is why it happened. Like, you don't need to do that right now. And I think that this is a microcosm of the larger problem of the Trump administration where, you know, they're going around interviewing people for all sorts of low-level jobs saying, you know, who won the 2020 election? And the point being is that they want people to lie whether they believe it or not, they want the lie because that's a sign of loyalty and you're on the hook for it now, right?
Right.
And loyalty tests are understandable in patronage politics, and I think, you know, you can make an argument about how we screwed up with the civil service reforms and parties need to have more power. All those are interesting poli-sci arguments. But at the end of the day, Trump is politicizing the whole of government, including agencies that shouldn't be poisoned by DEI nonsense, but also shouldn't be poisoned by pro-Trump nonsense. They should actually just do the job based upon where the facts and the science take them. And this is just a good example of how an agency that everyone thought is or should be above and beyond political games and ideological games, agencies like the NTSB or the FAA or whatever, are now going to be dragooned into this sort of politicized, you know, Fox News pundit warfare. And I just think that's terrible.
Well, one of the reasons why you don't want to pre-cook the books or poison the outcome is because you want, in general, the public to trust you and to keep flying. But I don't know if Trump wants that. He benefits from conspiracy theories overall and chaos. He's at least totally indifferent to if the public trusts the government or his reports or the reports that come out of the government. I saw Sean Duffy interviewed by Jake Tapper on CNN, and it was 80% very fine, perfect interview. I sound like Trump talking about the call in Ukraine. A very good, very standard interview one would have with a transportation head after a disaster. And then 20%, this exactly loyalty test. Yes, the crowd at Inauguration Day was bigger. We don't know. Maybe he's right. Could have been DEI stuff. And that does, I don't want to fall into the trap that's saying everything and its opposite serves Trump's purposes, but I really honestly don't know how to rebut that idea when it comes to this air disaster, Katie.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of what is coming out of the administration right now is meant for an audience of one. And a lot of what Elon is saying is meant for an audience of one, whether or not it's true. Trump is mercurial. We know what happens when people question him or, God forbid, insult him. So maybe these people are just trying to keep their jobs, but their jobs are not necessarily what the American public should care about.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Chesterton's French, Jonah, which is the idea that a traveler comes across a fence in the Scottish countryside and says, this doesn't seem to make sense. Why is that here? And the answer and what you should do is not to say, then let's remove it, but to assume, well, it must serve a purpose until proved otherwise. This brings me exactly to what Elon Musk is doing with USAID, which is if you think the organization, and just to sum up, they halted all aid. They said they made an exception for food aid, but that doesn't mean that many people, thousands of people who are the beneficiaries of USAID aid won't suffer or die. Talking about Rohingya and the Thai-Myanmar border. But it seems to me that if you have a valid critique or even a valid suspicion that there could be a critique, what you wouldn't do is shut down all the aid and then make an assessment. You're not even assessing what the aid actually looks like, what the flows of aid are doing if you stop the flow. It seems to me what you should do is study it while it's flowing. But am I misapplying Chesterton's fence to this one?
No. I mean, your point is right. I'm not sure Chesterton's fence is perfect for this insofar
either
as
Chesterton's fence or Occam's razor. One of the two apply to everything.
So, I mean, there have been, Jesse Helms tried to get rid of AID. I mean, this is an old thing. It's not quite as prominent as getting rid of the Department of Education and all that. But one of the reasons why they're focusing on it is, one, there's a lot of boob bait stuff about foreign aid, right, which is like 0.001% of the budget or whatever. And two, because it was originally created as an executive order, it's easier to get rid of through executive action than some other things that are more concretely built by legislation. Though they're trying to get rid of that kind of stuff too. So don't,
Yeah.
But this is a throw everything against the wall
Also, this
kind of thing.
implies that the way they'd get rid of things would be to go by the book and do what's easy. Like, be dictated by the actual legislative realities of what's easier to dismantle than not.
Yeah, I think what they're doing is they are trying to do as much as they can that they think they can get past the judge, right? And the AID thing, they have a theory of the case. And I, as a matter of public policy, it's sort of like the birthright citizenship thing. I don't think Trump has any authority whatsoever to unilaterally rescind birthright citizenship. I'm fairly convinced that the constitutional argument that it's a constitutional right coming out of the 14th Amendment is correct. But as a matter of public policy, would I cry a river if we, the right way, passed legislation and got rid of birthright citizenship? It doesn't really matter to me that much, but you got to sort of do things the right way. They don't care about the doing the things the right way. So as a matter of policy, there's a lot of aid I'm in favor of. If it came straight out of the State Department rather than this independent agency, as a prudential matter, I'm open to the argument that would make more sense. The AID people will say, well, actually, the State Department is kind of radioactive in a lot of countries, and this buys us goodwill that we get to do things that we couldn't do if it was seen as a more political thing. But look, if the DEI, or just call it woke nonsense stuff, can penetrate into the FAA, I have no doubt that it can penetrate into an organization dedicated to global do-goodery like AID. But that calls for work with a scalpel, not with a sledgehammer.
Right. I think maybe there are some places, maybe Afghanistan could actually use a little injection of DEI in some ways. But, what's happening is Elon Musk comes from the tech world. He breaks things and then he asks questions later. And that might work when you own the company. But we're not talking about a small company like Twitter or even Tesla or SpaceX. We're talking about the federal government. So he's not risk-taking with his property. He's risk-taking with our property and with people's livelihoods. And I get that people don't like interacting with the federal government because it usually only happens when something has gone wrong, or you have to pay taxes or get governments renewed or stand in line at TSA. And that's not fun. But this idea that civil servants or people who go to work at nonprofits that get some government funding deserve scorn, which is what Elon Musk and Trump and their fans are doing. They are the glee that they express to see people who have joined the civil service mostly because they want to serve their country. I find it just bizarre. Like, I know people who worked in Afghanistan for 10 years. Did they want to go work in Kabul when they could, have stayed in the United States? Well, maybe they did for various different reasons. But these are people who really did actually sacrifice, and now they're out of a job. And yes, the government deserves scrutiny, obviously. But this hacksaw approach, it's insulting to the civil servants. It's insulting to the people. And frankly, I don't think it's really going to serve them in the long run. I mean, when Elon took over Twitter, he axed all these employees. It's still functioning, although I don't think the product is better than it was when he took over. It's overrun by bots and scammers and people trying to sell you crypto. It is still online. So maybe it's possible that ultimately this won't have a market impact on people's lives. But if people stop, getting their social security checks, or the wait times at the VA go up, or if their kids' clinical trials for cancer get shut down, or even if people have to wait longer or have to pay more for their off-brand Crocs that they get from Temu, I don't see how this is going to serve Trump in the long run.
Also, Katie, remember when he bought Twitter and shut it down for 3 days? No one could post? He did not do that. That is my point.
Right.
Right. But that's what he's doing with USAID, which doesn't seem to be the best way to get in there and figure out what the abuses are, which leads me to believe, he tweets this is an evil organization. I think it's mostly bluster. I don't know if he says they're all Marxist.
He doesn't fucking know. He doesn't know what they do. You're talking about a man who has never worked in government, an outsider coming in and if anybody's just normal workplace, if you have a new boss, a new publisher who comes in who has never worked in publishing before and tells people that everybody hates that. You need to have people with some institutional knowledge to figure out what the problems are, but he's alienating everybody within these agencies. So are they going to help him? No, they're not going to fucking help him.
So is there going to be blowback from the public? Is the public so incensed about the DEI allegations after a tragedy? Or, some pictures will start emerging of actual suffering of very vulnerable people. Is that going to actually hurt them, do you think, Jonah?
Look, there's a reason why we have the expression, the straw that breaks the camel's back. And it's not because straws are so heavy that they break camels' backs. It's because they're the last thing that people are like, all right, enough is enough, right? And so, first they came for USAID, but because I wasn't a Rohingya on the Thai border, I didn't say anything, right? But eventually it's going to start impacting people's lives.
Because you weren't a Zambian baby with diarrhea.
Exactly, right. And so, at some point, they're going to pick on something and blow it up, and people are going to like, holy crap, what are you doing, right? I think that's a safe bet. I also think the way to look at this, Musk is a sui generis figure in so many ways, right? But the broader pattern here, RFK, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, right? Before that, Matt Gaetz. We all know, all three of us are probably pretty good at criticizing movies. That doesn't mean that we know how to make a movie, right? These guys... This administration is working on this premise that the most vocal critics of something are therefore the best people to be the reformers. I've been pointing out for a while now, Pete Hegseth, who's less worrisome to me than, say, Kash Patel or RFK, but not a good pick. He may be right about the woke stuff in the military. It sounds like the recruiting stuff is turning around, and that's good. That's fine. A big chunk of the Secretary of Defense's job is basically like figuring out how to get 50 pallets of toilet paper from Kansas City to Kandahar in 16 hours, right? It is a massive logistics operation, payroll operation. It is incredibly cumbersome bureaucracy. He has no experience about how to actually run that kind of stuff. But the Trump administration is working on the premise that if you were a really good vocal critic on Fox News, therefore, you should be put in charge of the hen house. And there's going to come a point where it's destined where that's going to play out badly, and I don't know exactly where. And people are going to say, well, what exactly are we doing here? I also think it's, my friend Eli Lake did this great hour-long podcast essay about bullshit. And one of the points, I can't remember which, he talked to one of the guys from Penn and Teller, and he talked to this famous philosopher who wrote about bullshit. Right? And one of the things that really stuck with me was that there's a huge difference between bullshitting and lying. Lying pays a certain tribute to the truth. The liar knows what the truth is and says something else, but is working within the framework of what people, what it's a kind of the tribute that you pay to truth, right? Bullshitting just has no regard for the truth. And where Trump benefits in all of this is he thrives on chaos. Right? He creates this stupid ass crisis with tariffs in Canada and Mexico. and then he benefits by solving the crisis he created, right? That is the atmosphere that he wants to perpetuate. And if you get too bogged down on, well, in this game of three-dimensional chess, he had this win, or he did this because he benefited in that way, it's missing the overall point, which is just to keep people uneasy, to make people like, crave strength in a leader and all that kind of stuff. That's what he feeds off of. And it's very effective, and nobody really has any muscle memory about how to deal with that kind of thing, because we don't live in that kind of country until now.
Let me just say, Jonah, on your point that even if we're good movie critics, doesn't mean we can make a movie. Roger Ebert wrote one screenplay in his life, and it was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which was not a good screenplay. Now, Katie, I think you could run a Marxist coffee shop in Philadelphia better than the guys who actually did. I will say that.
I could do it better than the Marxists who actually tried and failed. They now work at Starbucks. I did start to see what I think were the first fissures after his, was this a lie or was this bullshit? I'm leaning towards bullshit. His announcement just yesterday that he thinks that we should take over Gaza. That was the first, from, my interaction with Trump crazies is all through social media. So this is not, I don't see typically like the standard Trump supporter, but I do see a lot of it online. And no matter what he does until this point, the tariffs, cracking down on free speech, whatever it is, they have mostly cheered him on.
Yes.
America first. And this is the first thing that I started to see some, hey, wait a second. I don't know. Do we really want boots on the ground in Gaza so that you can develop a hotel? Cat Turd will be the first one to sign up to clean the pool or whatever. He will have his forever fans, but I think he might have overstepped a little bit on this one.
Yeah, and that was even though he said it was going to be big and it was going to be beautiful, and they were going to want to leave and live in a big, beautiful place that is much better for them when they leave. Although the potential settling places of Egypt and Jordan are pretty clear. We will not be taking them. Quinnipiac University, which I checked. It's a real university, not just a hockey team and a polling site. Anyway, they said that while Americans were evenly split on their views of the Republican Party, 43 to 45 favorable to unfavorable, Democrats, 57% unfavorable, 31% favorable. And the Quinnipiac poll is echoed by YouGov, is echoed by CNN. A poll last week showed a record low 33% of Americans have a favorable view of the Democratic Party. Is Ken Martin the answer? Was Ben Wickler the answer? What is the answer? And I ask you, Jonah Goldberg, as author of Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left, you must be very upset by the standings of the Democrats.
Look, I have come to the view that I want the Democratic Party to be a healthy, successful party because it's the only way to make the Republican Party a healthy, successful party. Healthy competition between parties is a good thing. When each party decides to be a caricature, it gives permission to the other one to be even more of a caricature. And so, it would take a heart of stone not to laugh at some of the problems Democrats have created for themselves. I think I want to be really clear. On the merits, it is utterly meaningless that David Hogg is the deputy chair of the Democratic Party now. But symbolically, to put that pajama boy twink as a spokesman or symbol of Democratic Party proves that a lot of people haven't learned the lesson. And I do think that this point, just to do some rank punditry, I haven't looked at the internals of these polls, but it kind of does remind me and that, reminds me of when Obamacare was unpopular. One of the reasons why it was unpopular is that a lot of Democrats didn't think it went far enough. It was unpopular from the left. Right. Yes. So the Democratic Party is in this horrible pincer place where the median American, middle Americans, swing state Americans, white blue collar Americans, a lot of black blue collar and Hispanic Americans, they don't like the Democratic Party because they think it's the party of Latinx and birthing persons and all that kind of nonsense. And also a bunch of people from the hard left, sort of AOC leftward, don't like the Democratic Party because they think it's selling out to Trump's America. And They don't have any forceful personalities, because the way you get out of this is to have a candidate, have a leader who, through the force of their personality, can unite disparate factions of a party. They don't have anybody like that. Everybody of any positions of prominence are either like Chuck Schumer, who constantly sounds like he should be sending soup back at a deli, or people who still speak the sort of campus speak kind of lefty stuff, which turns off more people than it attracts, right? I mean, like, I've been banging my spoon on a high chair for a long time about Latinx, right? But like, they did survey after survey. To the extent Hispanics have ever heard the term, by like 4-1, they dislike it. They find it really condescending that these like smug, effete, coastal liberals are telling them how to like speak their own language. And I understand, leading Democrats, they use the term because they were told by their intermediaries that this is how you sound inclusive. But the people you're being inclusive towards are basically bookers at MSNBC and deans of diversity on college campuses. And meanwhile, you're repelling rank and file normal Americans. And so they often sounded like the salesman who says, sure, we lose money on every sale, but we're going to make it up in volume. And so the Democratic Party has to grapple with this crap, and they're just not there yet.
Okay. A thought of mine is that between the annoyances of Latinx and the excesses, the horrors to some extent of what Trump has been doing, what we were talking about the last segment, and maybe not being able to deliver America out of our inflationary place, Americans are still going to be more upset by the, to be fair, very annoying vocal tics of extreme liberals, Katie?
Well, it depends on what happens. So, best case scenario I agree with everything that Jonah said. The Democrats are, I'm a card carrying, if cards still existed, card carrying member of the Democratic Party. I vote in the primaries. If Democrats if they have any chance to survive, to make up for their losses in 2026, it will be a response to Trump. So I don't think they actually need to do much except cross their fingers and hope that he actually does tank the economy, that he actually does engage in this ridiculous trade war with our closest allies and with China. The worse Trump does, the more chaos there is, the more job loss there is, whether it's in the federal government or it's people in the private sector losing their jobs because of his proposed tariffs, the better off the Democrats will be, because we have two options and this is the other one. I mean, at heart, yeah, there's an absolute identity crisis within the party. I wasn't at the most recent big DNC thing, but from the reporting that I read, they are like leaning into these identity politics. The candidate they're most enthusiastic now appears to be Kamala Harris. So they appear to have learned zero lessons from getting their asses handed to them, but they will still benefit from the fact that there is only one Donald Trump. He has hopefully just these 4 years left, and then my hope is that we can just like fucking wipe the slate clean and maybe shit will go a little bit back to normal. Maybe I'm being too optimistic here.
No, I mean, American politics is thermostatic. So there will, and I do think the Democrats are going to win the midterms because the out party almost always does.
Yeah.
I think the Democrats definitely have a branding problem. And I don't think, both you guys are pointing to the fact that the Democrats would be upset that I called you both you guys. And so that is important. That is not something to gloss over, because people understand politics and the platforms of politicians based on what they say. And if they are emphasizing nonsense, or, let us be fair to the people on campus, very essential, important things that still somehow do not strike the average voter as improving their lives, the Democrats are going nowhere. But it's not just a branding problem, because the Democrats always say, or Wickler or Martin, or the ones who more or less get it, the one thing they will always say is, we need to win back the working class. Sometimes they will say, we need to win back the white working class. They should just say working class, because they lost the Latino working class, I do believe, and they're losing the black working class. But I don't have a problem with that. Articulate for me two policies where an average American will look at the Democrats and look at the Republicans, and this average American, being in the working class, will say, well, the Democrats' policies are clearly superior. Now, I know one thing the Democrats would say is unions, but when I look at the actual appeal of unions, when people get to vote for unions, they don't. And it's not only because the bad boys at Amazon in Bessemer put their finger on the scale. It does seem that the appeal of unions to the private sector is not quite what it was when Joe Hill was singing songs about unions. So, but I'll give Democrats that. Unions are one. How are you going to help the lives of working class? One is unions. And what's the next thing? I don't know what they'd say. Would they say raising the minimum wage? Maybe you guys know it off the top of your heads. I think it's 7% of all people actually get paid the minimum wage. I don't see what their big program is that clearly is different from Republicans, that will maybe come at a political cost to other parts of their coalition, but that is clearly not what Republicans say, but also clearly in the favor of the working class. And until they get that actual policy, you could stop saying Latinx as much as you want. I don't see why you're going to appeal to the working class. Am I missing something, though? Is there a big policy out there? I think our silence speaks volumes.
The only thing I can think of is a sort of goes against maybe the wishes of the working class, which is increasing immigration, right? Mm-hmm. Because that lowers working class wages, but also we need immigration. We are facing worker shortages across many different sectors, especially ones that are increasingly important as baby boomers age, like healthcare. So if you want to be able to afford to pay somebody to take care of your mom so that you don't have to do it yourself, we actually do need an increase in immigration. So things like that, but also that clashes up with all of the culture war issues where Trump is winning.
So I agree with you on policy front, right? I'm for, my standard response for 25 years now when people ask me what my preferred immigration policy is to have one, right? Yeah. And whatever it is, let's just sort of stick with it and enforce it, right? And you can't have chaos because then people get pissed off. That said, I don't think immigration is something that Democrats know how to do right now in a way that wins back people who care about immigration, right? Because
they always frame it as purely a moral question, and their immigration policy is just anti-cruelty, but that's not really a policy.
Yeah, I'm anti-cruelty too, but that's just, that's not the world we're living in. I think the Democratic Party in particular has a particularly acute problem. It is the party of government historically. It is the party that says government can help you. There's not a criticism, right? It's just like the Republican Party up until, this decade was the party that said limited government, smaller government, private sector, all that kind of stuff, right? Stuff I still believe in. And the Democratic Party was like, no, the party of FDR, the party of LBJ, the government is here to help you. It can give you it can lift you up. Bill Clinton was the best guy at sort of spinning it as give you a hand up, not a hand out, that kind of stuff. That's all great, but he still believed in the efficacy of government to improve people's lives. That puts an enormous onus on Democrats to run government well. And I think it is amazing to me that Trump has flat out won on the issue of competence. And it should be incredibly embarrassing to Democrats that Donald Trump won on the issue of sort of common sense, making the government do the things that we want government to do, right? Like Rahm Emanuel, I've had lots of criticism of Rahm Emanuel over the years, but he was a mayor of Chicago. He cared a lot about collecting garbage and fighting crime and business formation and all that kind of stuff. Nick Glazer has this great line in the early 1990s. He said part of the problem, and he was one of the great students of urban reform and all of that. And he said, look, the problem is that because he was always a liberal, he says, the cities went south when we stopped focusing on the things we knew how to do and started focusing on the things that we don't know how to do, about social transformation and getting rid of income inequality, eradicating racism, and all of these sorts of things that are socially transformative and might be entirely desirable. But most people want from government the stuff that they think government is there to do. Collect the garbage, fight crime, educate kids, right? All that kind of stuff. And the problem is, not to get all public choice theory, but the Democratic Party is no longer really the government of government per se. It is the party of government unions, of public sector unions whose interests are in conflict with the services that people want government to provide. And that this was put, really harsh light was put on this during COVID, where all of a sudden the teachers' unions were more about themselves than they were about the kids. At least that's the perception. And I think that was an illustration of the larger problem that they have. They would be really smart to follow like Governor Shapiro, who suspended all of the bogus nonsense rules, right? He was sort of a Ezra Klein guy. Get rid of the regulations that restrict government so that government can rebuild this highway in like 10 days. Because if they had followed the rules, it would have taken 2 years. And Francis Fukuyama is writing a lot about this stuff these days. Like, that is the low-hanging fruit for either party. The party that can actually just do the shit that people expect from government well without being utopians. And the problem is that MAGAism is a kind of utopianism too. You know, new golden age, my ass, right? All that stuff. But the Democratic Party is all about, fundamental transformation of society. That's not what most normal people want from government. They want, the checks to arrive on time, the roads to work, and that kind of stuff. And neither party seems really focused on just that basic provision of goods and services that people expect from government. I think that's the Democratic Party wants to stay the party of government. They got to be the party that runs government well.
And when the big Democratic cities, where a lot of people live, underdeliver, I thought Karen Bass was not doing a horrible job until she was in Ghana instead of tending to the fires. I think that Eric Adams is doing a horrible job. A Democratic listener might say, that man's hardly a Democrat, but he was titularly a Democrat. And when you have Johnson in Chicago not doing a good job at all, talking about union capture, this is not a good advertisement for Democrats and what government can do. What are maybe good advertisements are, you talked about Josh Shapiro, Jared Polis. And Jared Polis in Colorado, he basically is running government as if he were in charge of Consumer Reports. I'm going to give you savings left and right. And it works. It's tangible. The message isn't what we're going to do. We're going to help you, and we are here for the white working class. But first, we're going to have to say these correct terms and punish you if you don't say the terms. And then we're going to fill all our slots with people of a different, diverse background. And a lot of this verbiage went on at the DNC meeting. And you can't do everything. You have to piss off some members of your coalition, which is fine when your coalition is polling at 30-something%. This is the time to do something differently. And I do think what the easiest thing the Democrats have to do differently is just the verbiage. And I wrote about them being the party of HR. It's a little tweaking of branding, and just stick to the one question: how am I improving the average person's life? Not the average college educated person, not the average person who uses Latinx, but maybe even the average person who doesn't like the Latinx phrase, or maybe even the average person who looks down on pointy-headed liberals, right? Just the average person. And Chuck Schumer, when he was a little bit younger and more with it, had this couple from Massapequa, and they were fictitious, but he said, all of my policies have to help them. He hasn't talked about them in 5 or 10 years. I think every Democratic politician should invent such a couple and say to themselves, how are my policies helping them? And then they'll go from 30-something% to the below favorable, but 40-ish% that all American politics seems to have to exist in. Katie.
Yeah, I think you're right about this. And the frustrating thing about it is that it's not as though Donald Trump campaigned on bread and butter issues, right? He talked about the economy, he did. And then he comes into office and he immediately enacts policies that are going to make the economy shrink. And
he got bored. He was visibly bored, and he blamed people who said you have to talk about food prices. It bored him.
Right. So then he focuses on DEI and, pronouns and government signatures. He gives all of this power, unchecked power, to Elon Musk. I mean, targeting cancer researchers, these things, I have to think that as this filters down and this starts to impact real people, when they can't get their medications from the VA, this is going to be an absolute disaster, and the Democrats will benefit from that. That doesn't solve the problem that we have basically a Congress that hasn't been functional in years. Maybe that's the fundamental problem here, is that now the federal wing of the government has just too much power because Congress doesn't do shit. And I'm really curious to see if Congress does anything to rein in what Elon Musk is doing right now. Is that even possible?
Jonah, was there ever a time when, say, maybe we're being unfair, was there ever a time when there was consensus that the cities were working? I like Mayor Bloomberg, got a lot of shit from Democrats. Was it during, the great reign of Chicago controlled by familial dynasties? Was there a time of great city dominance and it was to the Democrats' credit?
Yeah, I think Daley ran Chicago. Look, a lot of these things have, there are larger social forces at work, right? The deindustrialization of big cities is a huge thing, and it makes them harder to run. New York City used to be a huge manufacturing center. But it's interesting, Pittsburgh, I'm a big Pittsburgh fan. It deindustrialized, they lost steel at the same time, like inner city of Detroit lost cars. But they handled it really, really well. And Pittsburgh has been on the list of the top 10 most livable cities for like 25 years. It's a great town. It still has a downtown. These things are doable. The problem is like, part of it is when planes land safely, it doesn't make news. When cities operate properly, it shines a light on the places where there are still problems. I take a backseat to nobody at my disgust about what has happened to Rudy Giuliani. But as someone who grew up in New York City, Rudy Giuliani was a really successful, good mayor of New York for a while. And in part, his success stemmed from the fact that he was an outsider who was not beholden to the Democratic machine so that he can just tackle a lot of low-hanging fruit and like quality of life stuff. And it just seems to me that that's the place to go. That's where most Americans live, right? And I've written about this a couple times. I've never really done it justice. I think one of the great innovations of Donald Trump and Fox News was successfully merging what I call bridge and tunnel populism with flyover populism, right? It used to be like the idea in 2016 that a thickly accented guy from Brooklyn, Jewish atheist, and Donald Trump, a guy from Queens, land developer, would be the avatars for America's populist movements. It was kind of bizarre. Normally, those are the kind of people you point the pitchforks at. But Trump's coalition is a blue-collar populist coalition that includes urban and suburban populists. And a lot of those people, if you look at the people who are like big factors at Fox News when I was there, from Bill O'Reilly down, these are people who basically either grew up in the city, then moved to the suburbs, or grew up in the suburbs with talk about how great New York City was before the blacks came, or before the libs ruined it, or whatever.
Or in O'Reilly's case, grew up in East Meadow and claimed to live in Levittown because that had more cultural relevance.
Yeah, but my point is that they have this rosy, nostalgic, golden age kind of vision of this stuff. And when you read exit interviews with people in the suburbs voting, they're all terrified about the problems of the cities coming to the suburbs, right? I just think that fixing cities, you rob banks because that's where the money is. You fix cities or metro areas because that's where most people's interaction, that's where most people live, that's where most of the voters are, and that's where their interactions with government are most noticeable. And if Democrats don't do that, Republicans will start doing that, and Republicans will be the majority party for a very long time post-Trump.
Yeah. Well, Katie, you live near an extremely functional city, Seattle. I usually hear about it from you, and it's just one glowing review after another, thus forcing you to leave the Northwest for half the year for Appalachia.
Yeah, although that is mostly based on the weather. But yeah, Seattle,
So is Pittsburgh and people like that, apparently.
True.
Less sunny days in Seattle.
The problem that I think the most, I don't live in Seattle anymore. I moved an hour outside the city. So when I go through, it's usually just to like get a meal or go to the airport. And the thing that is most visible is homelessness and drug addiction. There's I don't know if it's in New York or DC, but there's this very particular heroin lean, the fentanyl lean. Everybody can see it. My wife works at a hospital in Seattle, and every day when she goes to work, there are people shitting in doorways on the way to work. These are things that can be corrected. I mean, and very difficult problems to solve. You know, you might have to commit a few human rights abuses to get them off of the street. But these are, or maybe Trump's tariffs will work. His fight with the Canadian Mounties, they'll keep all the fentanyl out of American cities. There are certainly policy positions you can take that would make this at least less visible. I don't know if policy can decrease the demand, but that could make
policy positions you could have taken not to allow it. Keith Humphreys wrote about this all throughout the Pacific Northwest, and including Vancouver. The policies, the drug legalization policies, were largely informed by very quote unquote progressive people. Not pairing these legalization policies with any sort of enforcement for things like shitting in the street or, doing drugs out in the public. This was a policy choice. It was seen as the right thing to do from a progressive standpoint. And it totally not only blew up in the face and ruined lives or decreased the quality of life for people like you, it didn't help the very population they were trying to, which are people who use drugs.
Right. And Oregon decriminalized drugs for what, a year?
Yeah,
I mean, these are, to their credit, they recriminalized them after it was clear that this was a total policy failure. And fentanyl is not the fault of blue cities. There's a lot of fentanyl in West Virginia too, but it's just more visible in places where people are congregating outside and doing their drugs outside.
All right, now is the time in the show where, because the rest of the show is all cheery and no complaints, we will tell the audience what gets our goats, what grinds our gears. These are our goat grinders. Katie Herzog, what's your goat grinder?
Women drivers.
Oh, no, you didn't.
No, I'm kidding. Okay, but we can say that now, right? Trump's America. No, I mean, the list of things that grind my goat is honestly longer than the list of programs that Trump is going to cut. We've got tipping culture, hate that, hate the fucking iPads, leash laws, people who listen to music in public without headphones, people in general. But the thing that is grinding my goat most at the moment is that it's very specific. My favorite Instagram influencer couple, these lesbians in Nashville, they announced out of nowhere that they are divorcing. And so their names are Mandy and Danae. I've been following them for a few years. They're very big on TikTok, very big on Instagram, very cute, well, one's funny, one's pretty, which is exactly what you need in a couple. And they seemed very much in love. And then just a few months ago, they sold their house in Nashville, bought a farm outside the city, raising horses. And then out of the blue, they post an update. We are divorcing. Please respect our privacy. And of course, we don't know what's going on in people's lives. The things influencers post online are, of course, highly filtered. But if you have spent years sharing your lives, cultivating an audience, posting every piece of avocado toast and outfit of the day, and making money off of this content, I think you owe it to your audience to tell us which one of you cheated. I am just so upset about this. You owe it to us. I am tempted to move to Nashville and befriend them just to find out what happened. I will hire a PI over this. I must know who did what.
That's good. That's a good concept for a Netflix series. Obsessive fan befriends them just to find out. My goat grinder is the complaint that Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire, is playing fast and loose with. I'm not even going to complete the sentence because there's the goat grinder. It's the unelected billionaire. And the cousin of the unelected billionaire is something that Elon Musk always accuses his boogeyman of being, the unelected bureaucrat. It turns out that there are no elections for billionaires. And if there were, none of the current billionaire class, except maybe, I'd say Paul McCartney and Oprah Winfrey, would not win the elections. And there are no elected billionaires. There are no elected bureaucrats. That's what makes them bureaucrat. And if you zoom out, not to the 30,000 feet, but like 4.5 feet, just get on a decent sized step ladder, you will think about the complaint of the unelected billionaire and the unelected bureaucrat and say, well, is the solution for that the electeds? Because we hate the electeds even more. The reason the unelected billionaire has to get in there, or the unelected bureaucrat has to figure out a way to spend money is because these elected officials screw it up for everyone. So I try not to get more upset about the phrasing to describe someone whose actions upset me. But given the choice between the unelected billionaire Elon Musk monkeying with our process and the choice between someone pointing out oh so helpfully that he's an unelected billionaire, it's close as to who grinds my gears and gets my goat more. Jonah, what do you got?
So originally I was going to do one which Katie briefly touched on. I have been fighting this losing war against the use and abuse of the term neocon as basically everything from warmonger to bagel snarfing warmonger, right?
Yeah.
And then I have to listen to you just want forever wars in the Middle East, right? That's what Vivek Ramaswamy and all these people have been saying. That's JD Vance. And now we're going to have Mara Gaza, where America is going to occupy the Gaza Strip, and everyone's, that's awesome, Pax Trumpiana and all that kind of stuff, and nobody is like not a single neocon in human history has ever said, let's threaten force against our NATO ally Denmark to seize Greenland. But all these people all of a sudden have thrown all that aside. But I'm going to switch gears since we were talking about cities, which I didn't think we were going to get into, and it's probably my fault that we did. And this is closer to home and much closer to those damn women drivers thing. DC has gone crazy with bike lanes. Crazy with bike lanes. It's also gone crazy with bus lanes. I think the case for bus lanes is defensible, right? As a matter of public transportation, you can do a cost-benefit analysis about that, about public transport. But in conjunction with bike lanes, it is making it impossible to drive in Washington, D.C. And they put bike lanes in my neighborhood a year and a half ago on this strip that has taken a choke point already in traffic and turned it into, basically a thimble of traffic can get through any one traffic light. And I've paid attention. In the last 18 months, I have seen 6 bikes on this bike lane. I was one of them. It is a perfect example of what I was talking about before, the Nat Glazer thing about trying to make cities into things to solve problems like global warming, rather than actually improving quality of life stuff. And the bike lobby is vicious and nasty, and I know I will get lots of complaints from people when word gets out that I've spoken ill of them, but they are ruining big chunks of DC, and more infuriatingly, they put in bike lanes on Canal Road near my house, and they don't use them. They still block the road. So fee on all of them, tear up the bike lanes, make cities workable again.
Excellent. I mean, terrible, but excellent. Great job, Jonah. Katie Herzog, she is the co-host of the Blocked and Reported podcast. She is author of the forthcoming Drink Your Way Sober, the science-based method to break free from alcohol, which is apparently #1 in the alcohol recovery rubric of Amazon. Sorry, alcoholics, it's not out for a couple of weeks.
Hey, and alternative healing.
And alternative healing. She's got the feeling for alternative healing. And I want to thank also Jonah Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Dispatch, and he also hosts the Remnant podcast on The Dispatch, which is an excellent listen as always. Thank you, Jonah.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, we're not saying we're right. We're not saying you're right. We are saying we're not even mad.